we'll move on to the first session of the conference, Cultural and Architecture Traditions. Dr. Vinay Kumar is going to present on philosophy and culture behind Hindu temple architecture in India. Vinay Kumar.
So a very good morning to all of you. I am Dr. Vinay Kumar from Banaras Hindu University, Varanasi, and today I am going to talk about the philosophy and the culture behind the Hindu temple architecture and in India. Before I start my talk, first of all, I would like to express my gratitude as well as my acknowledgement to Sri Nagarajji Patoriji, and who is the Senior Director of Indica, and Sefali Vaidyaji, and these people, they have invited me and given me a chance to express my views before all of you. For that, I am very much thankful to both of you. And before I start, just I would like to give a quote by Frank Lloyd Wright. He is an American architect who is of the view about the architecture. He says that architecture is that great living creative spirit which from generation to generation, from age to age, proceeds, persists, creates according to the nature of the man and his circumstances as they change. That is really architecture. And according to George Michel, when we talk about the Indian temple architecture, the temple is the most characteristic artistic expression of Hinduism, providing a focus for both the social and spiritual life of the community it serves. And we know that this word temple has been derived from the Latin word tempanum and templum, which means a sacred precinct or a space. And according to the definition, a temple is a structure reserved for the religious or the spiritual activities, such as prayer and sacrifice, or analogous rites or activities. And traditionally, this temple is a sacred structure and also an indicative of a word of God. And as we all know, temples are not only a place of worship, but they play an important dominant role in cultural, social, and economic life of the people. And of all the constructional activities which were prevalent in our past of the early India, the temple building was the foremost. And in all ancient literatures, whatever we talk about, we find the mention of the term for the temple like Devale, like Devayatan, Devakur, Devagri, and so many other terms are there. And all these indicate that the ancient temple was the house of God. And the earliest temple, when we talk about the historicity or the beginning of this temple architecture, so the earliest example are in temple in India, they are assigned to the 2nd and the 1st century BC. And the Brahmi inscription of the 2nd century BC, which has been found from a place of Besnagar in Vidisha, in Madhya Pradesh, and it commemorates the creation of a religious column in honor of Vasudev by the Heliodorus. And besides that, an inscription found in the Rajputana regions, that is the Ghosundi inscription, it tells us about that Bhagavatabhyam, Shankarsanam, Vasudebhyam, Ahitabhyam, Sarvesarabhyam, Puja Sila Prakaro Narayan Vatika. So here we can find out the recording of the construction of a stone enclosure for the worship of Sankarshan and Vasudev by a chieftain whose name was Jayan, and he is ascribed to the 1st century. This particular structure is ascribed to the 1st century BCE. And beside that, Kautilya's in his Arthashastra prescribes the building of the temple on the dimensions of the Vastu, and not only for the site divinities, but also for the deities like Aparajit, Jayan, Shiva, and moving forward, the Kharvel is recorded to have repaired the temples of the different sects. For the ramparts of the and the towers had also been blown away by the wind. We know about that one through the inscription of Kharvel in Odisha. And the Bilsad inscription, it mentions about the temple of the Skand Mahashen. So on this basis of the above evidence, we can see that, or we can easily say that the temples were existed before 6th century BC in India. And the earliest group of the Gupta temples, these are the Gupta temples, which date us around 5th century CE. And these were of a single celled sanctum with a portico, the mandapas resting on the 4 pillars. That is the temple number 17 at Sanchi, Tigwa, and Eran. And the earliest structural temple that have survived is that is devoted to Lord Vishnu. And aside to the 5th century only itself, it is credited to belonging to the Gupta dynasty. And another temple ascribed to the same period is of the Dasavatar temple at Devgarh, about which we know. So now coming to our main topic, what is now about the philosophy behind these temple architecture in India. So I will be just talking about the philosophy. What was the philosophy of the temple construction in ancient India? The temples, they are built to establish the contact between man and God, that we know. And the rituals and the ceremonies, they are performed in the temples, and they have primarily influenced the forms of the temple architecture. And the identification of the divinity with the fabric of the temple and the reflection of the form of the universe with that of the form of the temple is of supreme importance in Indian architecture. And hence the importance is given right from the selection of the site of the temple to formation of the ground plan and also to its vertical elevation. And this symbolic representation of the cosmic idea is well reflected in the construction of the temples in India. So the symbolic representation of this cosmotic idea is formalized by the creation of the sacred mathematical treatise with precise measurement system, and the plans of the temples, they are based on the sacred geometric diagrams, which is known as mandalas. So I was talking about the Vastu Purush Mandal, which explains about the symbolic diagram, that is the mandala, and the gods, in seeking to impose the order on chaos, forced the primal man, that was the Purush, into a square grid, the Vastu Purush Mandala, and whose basic unit is the square path. And Hindu temple is the dwelling of the gods. It is based on the grid system of 64 and 81 squares. And a square is the perfect shape for the ground plan. And here the priest perform ritual of the consecrations, which connect between the sexual rights and the fertility in Hindu architecture, that we know, that I will be talking later on. And the Hindu philosophy was among the first to relate the human figure as the basis of a system of the proportion. And in Hindu philosophy, the form of the Purush, that was the human body, was made to suit the abstract idea of the square as the supreme geometric form. And the Vastu Purush Mandal is derived from 3 separate words, each having a specific meaning. The Vastu refers to the physical environment, Purush refers to energy, power or cosmic being, and the Mandal is the diagram or the chart. So the basic form of Vastu Purush Mandal is the square, and the square is the important and ideal geometrical form in Hindu philosophy, which represents the earth. All the necessary forms like the triangle, hexagon, octagon, and circles can be derived from this square. And the 4 sides of this square, they represent the 4 cardinal directions. The square also symbolizes the order, the completeness of the endless life, and the perfectness of the life and the death. According to Hindu belief, man's everyday life is also governed by the number 4 in 4 classes, varnas, 4 varnas, 4 phases of life that we know about, the brahmacharya, banprasth, and sannyas ashram, and 4 great eras also are there. 4 head of Brahma, the creator God, and the 4 Vedas we know. So similarly, the circle represents the universe and is considered as the perfect shape without any beginning and end, suggesting timeless and the infinity and the typical heavenly feature. So in the form of the grid, which squares the unit clearly make the areas of the respective god in case of this mandala. And the most commonly used mandal is the square divided into 64 and 81 square. Mostly the square of the mandal on its outer periphery are divided into 32 smaller squares in accordance to the astronomical calculation, which is known as nakshatra, representing the constellations or the position of the planet through which the moon passes in its monthly path. And the cloud polygon of these 32 squares is symbolical to the recurrent cycle of the time as calculated by the movement of the moon. The four directions outside the mandala, which represent the meeting of the earth as well as the universe, as well as the movement of the sun from east to west and its rotation to the north and south hemisphere. So the central position of the mandal is the place for the Brahma, the creator. The rest squares are position of the other gods as per their relevance in Hindu architecture. So you can see here in this diagram about that one, which I have already talked to you. So this Vastu Purush mandala, they are of various types. They are from the because of their fundamental shapes as well as that was the square. And the smaller squares in the grid, they are called as the one path, and they may vary from 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, and so on up to so many infinable number, which follows a geometric progression series of 1, 2, 3, 4 up to 32 with the common factor of 2. So there can be even number of paths and odd numbers of paths in a mandal, and they are called the Yugma mandal as well as the Ayugma mandal respectively. And the Vastu Purush mandal has different names according to these numbers of the path within the grid. This mandala having the 1, 4, 9, 16, 25 and 32 numbers of the path within the grid are known as Shakala mandal, Pechaka mandal, Pitha mandal, Mahapith mandal, Manduk Chandita, this Chandita mandal, and the Paramashrikiya mandal respectively. So you can see in this the various types of this Vastu Purush mandala. This is from the source from the book of the Riyan. And here this Vastu Purush mandal having all the geometrical, astronomical and the human properties was the basis for the ground floor plan for all the Hindu temples. And the basic shapes acquired by these temples plans is the outermost ring of the square of the mandal, which forms the thickness of the wall of the main shrine. And the central 4 square, it acquires the place of the main deity, and the inner ring of the 12 squares form the walls of the Gurbagri, and the next 16 to 28 forms the Pradakshinapath of the temple architecture. And these simple divisions of the square with many permutations and the combinations became the basis for the complex structure of the temple architecture in ancient India in the form of orthogonal as well as stellate plans of the temple, which we can see in the extreme South India. Therefore, the large squares of the mandalas, they were divided into the 1,000 squares, thus virtually forming a graph paper for the architect to facilitate him to add a unit at one side and setting back onto the other. You can see it here. These are the different names of these mandalas, which I have already told you. And you can see this Vastu Purush mandalas and the division of this particular space and the creation of different architectural unit according to this square division. So now coming to in Hinduism, the attainment of the spiritual perfection is through this progression of the various stages of consciousness that we know. And thus the temple is a place of transit as well as a ford or a passage. And the symbolism of the passage through the doorway is represented by the idea of changeover from temporal to the perpetual world. And the sacred deities, they are placed in a small sanctuary within the temple, which is known as Gurbagri, or the womb chamber of a temple. And the interior space of the temple are arranged to promote the movement of the devotee from outside through a series of enclosure, which became increasingly sacred and dark as the enclosure is approached. At a general level, when we talk about the nomenclature of these spaces as one pass from outside to the inside of the temple is known as the antaral. For example, when we talk about the different components or the elements of the Hindu temple, you can see here the sanctuary as a whole is known as the Biman, that consists of the two parts. The upper part of the Biman is called the Shikhar, and the lower portion inside the Biman is called the Gurbagri, Shela, or the inner chamber. And these are this component or the elements of the Hindu temple. It is the Gurbagri, which is the nucleus and the innermost chamber of the temple, where the image or the idol of the deity is placed. And the chamber is mostly square in plan, and it is entered by the doorways on its eastern side. And the visitors, they are not allowed inside this one. And another component or another element of this Hindu temple is the Pradakshinapath, which means the ambulatory path for the circumambulation. It consists of the enclosed corridor carried around the outside of the Gurbagri. The devotees, they walk around deity in clockwise direction as a worship ritual and symbol of respect to the temple god or goddesses. Mandapa is the pillared hall in front of the Gurbagri for the assembly of the devotees, and it is used by the devotee to sit, pray, chant, meditate, and watch the priest performing the rituals. And it is also known in other parts of India or in regional variations as the Nat Mandir, meaning the temple hall of dancing, where in olden days, ritual of music as well as the dance was performed, which has become the part of my next part of my lecture, that is the culture behind this temple architecture. In some of the earlier temples, the mandap was an isolated and the separate structure from the sanctuary, like in Mahabalipuram. Antaral, meaning the vestibule or the intermediate chamber, it unites the main sanctuary as well as the pillared hall of this temple. In some temples, we also find the structures like the Ardh Mandap, meaning the front porch of the main entrance of the temple leading to the mandapa. You can see in the diagram, you can see all these components or the elements of the Hindu temple architecture. So these are the Bhog Mandap, Nat Mandir, Jagmohan, Rekha Doil, and this is the plan of a temple of the Ananta Vasudev temple at Bhubaneswar here. For example, when we enter inside a temple from the outside, the first step or the first space which we encounter is the Bhog Mandir, which generally means the offering space, where we offer the food basically which is basically meant for the deity. And when we come to the Nat Mandir, the next component here, which is the dancing hall, it is usually used for the performance of the dancing as well as singing to the god. Dancing in Hindu philosophy, we know that is a prototype of the cosmic dance. That is, it brings into play every portion of the body in movement, which symbolizes the spiritual state of any individual. And the return to the soul being from whom all things have been just originated, and to whom all things return to the ceaseless and the flow of life force is being just begin. And the space that comes next is the Jagmohan, which is used as an assembly space to look at the deity. And after that comes the threshold, that is the Antaral, to the Sanctum Sanctorum, that is to Gurbagri. And the nomenclature of these spaces also describe the philosophy behind all these things. And one has to pass through while attaining the absolute knowledge of the Supreme God. As one enters the temple, he has to come to the Bhog Mandir. The term Bhog in Sanskrit means that anything or any object for enjoyment, as food, as festival, and also as experiencing, feeling, percepting, and so many more. And this space signifies the first tier of a spiritual upliftment, when the aspirant starts realizing that the world is a place of feeling of pleasure and pain, and all these are temporarily in nature. So this symbolizes that this Bhog Mandap. Next is the Nat Mandir, which symbolizes the next level, where the aspirant or the devotee here realizes the rhythmic dynamicity of the nature, and the whole universe is thus engaged in endless motion and activity in a cosmic dance of energy. The next stage of spiritual upliftment is where this aspirant realizes that the whole universe is just a infatuating, just paraphernalia only. And this space is Jagmohan. Jag in Sanskrit means the universe and the world, and the Mohan means the depriving of the consciousness, that is the bewildering, confusing, perplexing, and leading astray, infatuating. And this progression is spirituality is also reflected in the increasing volume of the space as one passes from the Bhog Mandap to the Jagmohan. And beyond this is the womb chamber, that is the Gurbagri, which is approached by a small doorway, or that is the Antaral, where this devotee is free from all the confusions, pain and pleasure, a complete state of just transcendence. And this Gurbagri is small and dark, imitating the confinement of a womb. And this progression is symbolized as retracing the journey of the womb of, that is Prakriti, an embryo in the mother's womb. Is just like a threshold between this formless and the form. And this embryo is thus the closest physical form nearest to the divinity that is being one with this Purush. And the next level of a spiritual upliftment is symbolically represented by the movement of spiritual energy upwards as vertical tower of the summit of this temple, that is the Sikhar. This mandapa I have already explained. This is that Sikhar. And this is the mountain like the spire of a freestanding temple, and it is found in the North India, and the Biman we find in South India. And these Sikhars have a curving shape, while the Biman has this curving shape structure. And the capping placed at the top of the temple is known as the Amlak Kalash, and it is stone disc-like structure at the top of the temple, and they are common in the North Indian temples found at the top of this Sikhar. And here it is just like a ring stone with a three-dimensional shape if the filaments of the lotus are of a halo with its rays. In Sanskrit, Amlak means the fruit of the emblic marobulum, which is used as a medicinal plant in folk and Ayurvedic medicine in India. And this is reflected in the suffix of the officinalis. And perhaps it was the healing effect attributed to this fruit that should be passed to the architectural Amlak as a kind of. Yes, sir.
Can you
just I'm concluding, sir. Just I'm coming to conclusion.
Thank you.
And just it symbolizes the passage of the exit from the world and entry into the heaven. This is the topmost point of the temple and commonly seen in North Indian temple, that is the Kalash also. And this architectural and the sculptural motif in different sizes that appear on the body of the temple along with the temple form itself represents the rhythmic cycle of the time and the repetition of the cosmic era. So now coming to the conclusion, this ideology behind the designing of the Hindu temples was to link man with the gods. Hindu temple is the place where one can feel being close to the God, and it is depiction of the macrocosm, that is the universe, as well as the microcosm, the inner space, and has developed over 2000 years from right now. And according to this Hindu religious philosophy, a man's life is assumption of countless individual lifespans bound up in the cycle of rebirth, and one can achieve enlightenment through the pure deeds, thoughts, and the dedication. Thus, in this word, the temple is the symbol of enlightenment. It is the place where God's presence can be felt, and through rituals and ceremonies, men can discover the divine knowledge. Thank you very much for your patience listening.
Thank you, Vinay ji.